What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. If there's one type in Pokemon that's far and away the best, it's got to be Ground. That's just one biased opinion, of course, but it's so fun to be immune to electric types while getting to hit 5 other types for super effective damage, which is tied for the most destructive out there. There's also such a variety of designs when it comes to Ground that very few other types can effectively replicate. So if you were gonna be a Ruin Maniac like me, you probably thought about using a team full of only Ground types, but you might not know where to start. So let's take a look through each Pokemon region and weigh the available Ground options against their challenges and see where might be the best place to master the element beneath our very feet. Perhaps fittingly, we have a shakeup in the lowest spot because I'm going to say Alola. Normally the newer games can have an edge here, but Alola dropped the ball pretty hard by basically not allowing any Ground types until the second island. I know the idea is that you can theoretically get every single type by the time you leave Melee, but the only Ground type on the island seems to be Alolan Diglett, which isn't bad, but it's relegated to the fringe faraway caves that you may not even get to. So your best bet is to hope for one in Verdant Cavern, but that's only after you've already beaten the trial without it. And even then you would have to beat the Fighting Grand Trial with only one half Steel type, and even if you made it past that, your next possible teammate is a Barboach that you can only get by fishing, which you can't even do until you've beaten the second trial. So I doubt even if you evolved your Diglett, it would be able to solo the water types. And that's really sad because the new Ground types that Alola did bring in were all top-notch Pokemon. They just happened to be in a horrible spot to be used properly. I guess maybe because the whole region is made up of islands. But before we get into the second from the bottom, I have to tell you about today's video sponsor, Mantis Sleep. If the mistreatment of Ground types keeps you up at night too, get a restful night's sleep with Mantis' assortment of eye masks that can completely block out any light so you won't be disturbed. They have simple, comfortable designs, larger plush options available too, and even ones that can block out noise as well with the built-in Bluetooth speakers. The raised eye cups make sure the mask never actually touches your ever-so-sensitive eyes, which is better than traditional sleep masks any day. And they can be moved around to fit your specific face, no matter what your eyes look like. They even have cooling ones that are somehow made to constantly feel cool to the touch, and let me tell ya, I sure wish I had some of those earlier when my air conditioner went out early this extra hot summer. You can go to mantisleep.com and use promo code CUBONE for 10% off of your order of helpful sleepwear today, and finally get a rest after those long hours of gaming too hard. Now, as you probably could have guessed, the Unova region is once again not a good match for this type. The original Black and White only have enough for a full team if you count Landorus, which we usually don't, and honestly the sequels are only marginally better because they don't offer up anything until after the second gym anyway. Even in the region whose basis has the most overall land so far, Ground is still somehow scarce. Also, Kalos is shockingly bad for Ground too, only having Bunnelby to get you through the first gym, and it's not even really a Ground type yet. Then you don't get anything close to another option until Nincada on Route 6. That is a long way to go with just the Digging Rabbit. You do catch a break by cave diving before the second gym, which is great because they're good against the Rock type, but if you're dead set on making it work, you'll have to rely solely on Golett to get you through the fighting gym because most of the rest of your team will be weak to it. If you're just looking at the end of the game, it turns out pretty nice, but the amount of effort that it takes to get there is way too much of a detour away from Ground in the first hour or two of the game. Unfortunately, Kanto is not going to be very smooth for you either, since there are no Ground types to get before the Rock Gym, even though they would do pretty well, obviously. You could maybe allow Nidoran since they can become Ground types later on, so they could maybe get away with that because of their access to Double Kick starting in Yellow version, but then that and a Geodude are not going to do anything against Misty, and those are your only two options at that point. It can be better after that with you picking up an Onix before Surge, so that is nice, and then I guess you have some decent choices for later in the game that do have advantages over some important characters. However, the absence at the beginning, tied to the overall lack of type diversity, means that Giovanni must have been a lot braver than I thought for choosing Ground in this specific region. Now, Hisui isn't the worst, but you don't find a Geodude until halfway through the first area, and your only other hope is to maybe grab an overleveled Gastrodon. If you can do that, then it could take out the noble Pokémon pretty easily, but if not, then good luck with a Barboach, I guess. You do get a lot more in the Crimson Mirelands, but there the noble Pokémon is a grass type, so it's not like you're going to be able to construct a solid wall against it. At least you could try out an Ursaluna here, I suppose, but it seems like Hisui might just be the most neutral overall region for ground. Once again, Johto is surprisingly good here. You can grab a Geodude well before the first gym and trade for an Onix, which could easily get you past the first 2 gyms, even without the Wooper and Sandshrew additions along the way. However, that's all that you'll have until after Blackthorn. Sure, you can always go for Nidorans, but you can't get a Moonstone until you have Surf at the very least, so I'm not sure that it would be much fun going through most of the game with such limited options, especially when you don't have good answers for some of the heaviest hitters. Although it would be pretty fun to destroy Jasmine's steel types with your own ground types, I'll give you that. Now is when they start to get pretty good, but I don't think Paldea has what it takes to get any further. See, you would have to rely pretty solely on Paldean Wooper to get you past the Bug and Grass gyms, which it could do with its poison side, and then Iono wouldn't be too hard, but then you pretty much have to get a Toedscool to take on Kofu. Or I guess maybe be lucky and find a ground-type Pokémon with a Grass-Terra type attached. But despite the open aspects of the game that let you go wherever you want, it's misleadingly restrictive when you have to lean on certain Pokémon to get you through the specific parts, and it really narrows down this vast region. And while the Teal Mask and Indigo Disc offer up more options, a lot of them are repeated types that you already had access to. So they really shouldn't have made the most exciting and important ground types in the region all trapped as special Pokémon near the end of your journey. As we reach the top 3, it may be contentious, but I'm going to say Galar is here. Yeah, you know the drill. Even though there's nothing on the first few routes, the wild area offers up a whole lot of potential. If we're really honest, it's doubtful that you'll realize all of that potential and catch every possible ground type up to that point, and the first 2 gyms have you at a pretty big disadvantage. But if you could scrape together Nincada or Swinub, you can probably topple Milo, or at the very least get a Mudbray with stamina to make it through. However, there's not really anything for you to pick up before Nessa as a secret weapon, even by going to the Isle of Armor. Even the Fire Gym is compromised a little bit because of Bug resisting ground, so Kabu's Ace is neutral against you. At least Yamask's regional form could help out for both of the Stow-on-Side gyms. The Crown Tundra does get you a few more team members, but very few standouts that could help to save you later on. And sadly, there's only a singular ground-type Gigantamax form in the whole game, so really this type succeeds in spite of its mediocre placement, largely just due to the easy nature of Sword and Shield's general gameplay. The runner-up here will be Sinnoh, because it's pretty great for ground. Obviously, Turtwig eventually becomes a ground type, so you get to keep your starter, but even if you didn't want to destroy Roark with your grass type, you do get 2 more Pokémon as support for that first gym. There are really only 2 major hangups in Sinnoh, the first of which being the Eterna Gym, since nobody's really going to be that great against grass types, unless you took the time to get a Burmy from a honey tree, which you definitely didn't. However, after that, you're pretty good, taking out Maylene's Lucario easily with ground, and even if you did box your Torterra for Crash or Wake, you could have some of your own water types by then to fight him. However, the other major hangup for Sinnoh is that some of their best Pokémon are locked away as being almost impossible to find, or actually impossible to find, since you can't get the later evolutions until the National Dex in Diamond and Pearl. But in Platinum or the remakes, you could find other teammates like Swinub, Gligar, and Rhyhorn much earlier, and even a Gibble too. So if I had to make a ground-type team from just one region, I think Sinnoh would likely be the best. Though you can't always reliably get all of the best options, but man is it handy to keep your starter that whole time. And that sort of brings me to the number 1 spot, which might surprise you, as the Hoenn region. I'm not just being a Team Magma apologist, but here you also get to keep your starter by picking Mudkip. And of course your first challenge in Hoenn is Roxanne, and a Mudkip would be able to solo her no problem. But even if you feel like it's cheating to use it before it's evolved, you can also grab a Nincada before the Rustboro gym. And that'll still help you in your fight against the fighting gym as well, even if your new Geodude would be totally useless. Now ordinarily just 3 Pokemon might be tough to get you through some third preferred gyms, but here it's against Watson, and you'll definitely have a Marshtomp by now, so you can destroy him without any reservations, especially in the Gen 6 games where they're a lot better about learning actual ground attacks. Then you get to pick up a Numel of your own before the 4th gym, and it's able to help you all the way up to Meteor Falls. But things really open up once you get to the desert and pick up a bundle of new Pokémon that you can take all the way to the League. You can also get a Barboach here, but really it's only backup for your amazing Swampert. Poor Whiscash never really had a chance in this region, but any numbers are welcome to help build out the team. You can then go on to get a Phanpy and Rhyhorn in the Safari Zone, and that's actually it in the main games, which doesn't sound like a lot, but you've got everything you need. After all, Water, Fire, Rock, and Dragon, when paired with Ground, lead to at least neutral damage against every other type, so you'll be able to handle pretty much anything, especially if you pick up a Ruby version to get that Ground-type Legendary at the end, so that you can decimate the League, even lessening the water threats when it sets up the sun. Not to mention the possibility of Mega Evolution getting involved, giving your Swampert some crazy steroids to bolster your team too. I guess maybe Team Aqua had a point after all, since they recognized the dominance of Ground in the Hoenn region. That's honestly carried hard early on by just being able to utilize that starter from the beginning, or even for the Sticklers by the middle stage, which is a massive bonus that nowhere else gets, not to mention the Box Art Legendary as well. So you may not agree, but those are my thoughts on where it might be best to use teams exclusively made of Ground Pokémon. Be sure to go to mantisleep.com and use the Cubone code to get your 10% discount on your best night's sleep today. Which games do you think would be best to use the wonderful Ground type? Do you also see the existence of Sky Battles as blatantly unfair? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded!